During the Contra operation, the Contras may have used the cocaine traffic in order to gain funds to conduct their operations. The same pattern appears to be recurring in Colombia, where we are going to be working, at least indirectly through the Colombian military, with the so-called militias, who are directly connected to the major drug traffickers.
What is going on in Colombia is that there is so many people involved in the growing distribution, trafficking of plants, drugs, that it's very hard to tell who's what. I mean, this isn't just a matter of one side being involved in drug running as opposed to nobody else. It's endemic in the country.
You have to know that in Colombia, all the violence and the corruption are financed by the drug traffickers. And the traditional, most corrupt political establishment is also financed by drug trafficking. The problem is that we are giving billions of dollars of US assistance to a corrupt Colombian government.
While U.S. military assistance under Plan Colombia keeps pouring onto a dubious Colombian government and military, an estimated 400 billion narco dollars in solid cash are still freely moving about the world's largest financial institutions every year, without anybody apparently noticing anything.
As far as money laundering is concerned, it's true. 20 years ago, at the beginning of the first war on terror, George Bush was vice president. He was drug czar. He was in charge of drugs. There was an effort in Florida. In Florida, they discovered, the federal prosecutors, that there was a big flow of money suddenly coming into Florida banks. Everybody knew where it was from. They started an investigation. Bush intervened to call it off. That was the last effort to trace narco money in the United States.
What I would say is that I think governments work closely together, and their investigative authorities, I think, work very closely together to try to deal with that problem of money laundering.
Very repeatedly, there have been bills introduced in Congress trying to stop money laundering, but they've never succeeded. Mainly because of the power of the banking lobby. That is so much money that goes into U.S. banks and that goes into our economic system as a result of drug trafficking and much other illegal activity as well.
Nobody knows the details of the drug trade because it's illicit, but there are studies. So the OECD did a study, and I think their estimate was that about half the narco trafficking money passes through U.S. banks.
That UN report, which was done in 1997-98 for the big UN conference on narcotics at the General Assembly, the UN report concluded that the global traffic in all illicit drugs represents 8% of world trade. The traffic in illicit narcotics is larger than the trade in textiles, which is a human fundamental. Food, shelter, clothing are the three human fundamentals. Well, illicit narcotics as international trade is larger than one of those three human fundamentals. So the attempt to apply crude instruments of repression, police, law, military, to a global narcotics traffic is simply irrational.
Congress can repeal a lot of laws, but the law of supply and demand is not one of them.
There's an enormous demand for the drugs in the United States, and what we don't do in our own country is provide for the drug treatment programs.
But the drug treatment budget is nowhere near meeting national needs in most U.S. cities. An addict who reaches the point where they want help and they want treatment is usually turned away. They say, come back in a few months, we should have a slot open for you. There's just not enough money. Meanwhile, it's always easy to get in jail. There's no waiting list to get in jail. And that really reflects our priorities, I'm afraid.
In February 2002, with a large part of the U.S. military package under Plan Colombia already delivered, Colombian President Andrés Pastrana abruptly ends the negotiations with the FARC guerrilla. The U.S. State Department under President Bush officially shifts its priority in Colombia from counter-narcotics to counter-insurgency, conveniently dubbed anti-terrorism. The war on drugs smokescreen has served its purpose. Plan Colombia is no longer needed as a cover.
If we don't reduce the demand for drugs in the world, then in countries like Colombia, somebody's always going to grow it. As long as there's a market, as long as big money can be made, it's going to continue to go on.